Hello, and thank you for joining me again today on the Finding Hope After Loss podcast. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. If you like the show, please leave a review or rating on Apple or Spotify. It only takes a moment and really helps the show reach more loss and infertility families. Today, I am talking with Katie Joy Duke. She is an author, mindset life coach, public speaker, and advocate. She is also a stage 4 breast cancer survivor and bereaved mother. In this episode, she talks about the stillbirth of her daughter Poppy, going through breast cancer, and how these experiences have helped transform her into the person she is today. Hello, everyone. Today I am here with Katie Joy Duke. Katie, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. My name is Katie Joy. I am a mother to two children, one living, one in heaven. And I am a life coach and an author. And the most exciting thing that I've got going on now is I'm going to be hosting and leading my first retreat called the Emerging Goddess. And that's in March on a beautiful island here just west of Seattle, where I live, called Whidbey Island. And so excited about branching out into retreats and bringing more like-minded, amazing humans together to celebrate the goddesses that we are.
That sounds amazing. I love the
I
name of
know.
it. And yeah, it just sounds like something everybody needs to attend.
I think so too, and I'm just really thrilled. I feel very inspired by spirit, and I feel like this is just the next step in my journey of evolution and reinvention. And of course, my daughter who passed away, Poppy, is a big part of that inspiration and all the joy and hope that she brings to my life.
Do you mind sharing just briefly a little bit about your loss?
Yeah, absolutely. So our daughter Poppy Annabelle, was stillborn on October 26th, 2015. We were full term. Her due date was actually October 25th. We found out in the hospital after our nurse, as all nurses do, they begin monitoring the baby's heartbeat. And I was in labor. I had been, permitted to come to the hospital because of the frequency of my contractions. And it was only then in the hospital that we discovered she no longer had a heartbeat, which of course was, mind-numbingly shocking and devastating. And she was born later that day, and we got to spend that brief 24 hours with our beautiful angel, and then we had to leave her behind, and leave that hospital completely transformed and devastated, and not knowing how the world was still spinning, and how anyone could keep breathing. And so we started to continue living, but in that space of just total shock that something could happen like that a baby or that babies still die, and of course you understand that with your beautiful Jasmine. Yeah, and that was 9 years ago now. She would be 9.
Wow.
uh,
Sometimes it's so hard
yeah.
to believe how the time passes both so slowly and so quickly.
It does. Yeah, I have a living child now, Moxie, who was born in 2017 in October. And I don't as much anymore, but there were definitely periods of time where, Moxie was reaching that toddler stage, or the age where we would have play dates, but the mother would have two kids, and it would be the 4-year old and the 2-year old, or then it was the 6-year old and the 4-year old. And it was always, to me, just like, wow, this is what my life would have been like. And it's easy to do that, right? To imagine like, oh, and then again, I might not have Moxie if Poppy had lived. So I don't do a whole lot of, what ifs at this point. But yes, time flies. And every time I meet a 9-year-old, I'm always like, oh, what month were you born? What? And then I imagine, oh, especially girls, I'm like, oh, look how tall you are. Look at the style of your hair. Look how your face is starting to mature. And just imagining, what that would be like for my daughter, who is still with me very much in spirit, but not here physically.
That's something I've noticed that I do as well. Like I look at them like, wow, that would be her. She would have been 6 this year. This is, what she would be doing. Maybe she'd be liking this or, it's hard to not go down that path.
Yeah, yeah. And for, at this stage, usually there isn't a whole lot of emotion when it comes to that, right? I can kind of do it from just an objective perspective. But I did have this really magical experience earlier this year. We went to a pumpkin patch and it was with my mom's group. And there was a young girl who was a little bit older than my daughter, and she was waiting in line for us with us for a ride. And we ended up having this conversation, and she just had this like mystical sort of beyond her age wisdom and kindness about her. And we had this conversation, and and then I got to that point where I asked her, Evie, how old are you? And she said, 8, or she was just about to celebrate her birthday. Yeah, so she was 8. And I said, oh, when's your birthday? She said October. And I was like, oh, okay, what day? And she said the 27th. And I just like this flood of emotion. And my husband was standing in line, and I turned around and I allowed myself, I asked him for a hug, and I just allowed myself to feel that sadness, to feel that overwhelm, to feel like, oh my gosh, I feel like I just had a conversation with my child. Like it felt so special. And then I ended up talking to her mom later that day, and I said, I had this beautiful conversation with Evie, and I realized she was born the day after Poppy died. And then her mom told me her birth story and the mystical nature of her arrival and how she wasn't supposed to make it, and how she, and it's so, I think that for all the moms out there who are really struggling with early loss or multiple losses or whatever, like the more that we talk about our babies, the more we choose to remember them, the more we bring their energy into the space, I think the more that we can feel the collective humanity of that experience of suffering and life and death and joy and God energy and like all of the mystical unknown and really, and so that's something that has really given me energy and hope to continuously share my story and bring it up and choose to remember my daughter, because we never know what someone else is going through, and everyone has hard experiences. So anyway, I thought that was, it was just a really meaningful experience for me.
That is, I mean, and when things like that happen, I mean, I don't believe in coincidences, like those things are just supposed to happen. And
Agreed.
when they do, it's just like, oh, knocks you off your feet almost.
Yes, and I heard once that a good definition of a miracle is a meaningful coincidence, right? So and that felt like a miracle, right? Where it seems like, oh, that's like someone could be like, oh, that's just totally random, and there's only 365 days in a year, and blah 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 blah, whatever, right? But it had such meaning to me, and then and I of course could attach that meaning to it and say, oh, but this means something, and so that coincidence then felt miraculous.
I feel like people who try to brush it off like that, though, they probably never had an experience like that, right?
No, of course not. Yeah, they're very. Yeah, I'm not cynical by any means. Like I'm very woo woo, very woo woo.
And so you also wrote a book about your experience, right? Do you want to talk
I
about that a
did.
little bit?
I would love to. Yeah. So I studied English in college, and then I became a lawyer. And so writing was always something that I was good at and that I enjoyed. Legal writing, of course, is super boring and monotonous and whatnot. But when Poppy died, I almost immediately began writing to her. And then what started as, numerous heartfelt late night, early morning, whenever I could focus and get my thoughts out on the page, kind of journal entries and whatnot, eventually began to evolve into me really getting just even the tiniest bit of perspective on the story and the miracle of my husband and I and our love, and Poppy being a surprise pregnancy. She was unplanned but deeply wanted. And And so I spent 6.5 years writing her story and writing my story, and then gaining that incredible perspective in that 6.5 years writing. One of the things that I love about my story so much is that I I wrote in the contemporaneously, right? It wasn't like I went back and tried to remember. It's that by the time I found, I had my publisher and my developmental editor and a team of people to help me turn this into something really amazing. I had 150,000 words over the last 6 years. And then I edited, reduced, refined, distilled, and really turned it into what I believe is a super beautiful story. It's called Still Breathing: My Journey with Love, Loss, and Reinvention. And if I can, real quick, actually, I'd love to describe the inspiration for the title. You know, Moxie, that's my living daughter. Poppy was stillborn, and I was actually, it would have been 2019. Was it 2019 or 2021? I can't remember. Maybe it was during the pandemic. And I think it must have been during the pandemic. A friend had invited me up to Bellingham, Washington, where she had a guest bedroom. I really needed to get away. You know, it was that time. Yeah, it was definitely the pandemic when like no one could go anywhere or do anything. And I was desperate for some space away from my husband and my child, quite frankly. And so, you know, I think I got like 48 hours. I don't even know. Yeah, it must have been a very short trip. But anyways, I was driving up to Bellingham to go on this, essentially what I was considering a little bit of a writing retreat, because I just needed to be in a quiet space where I wasn't distracted by anything. And I ended up listening to this podcast that was about the basically the miraculous nature of a baby's first breath. And as I was driving, I just was like, oh my gosh, there's a billion podcasts out there. How did I pick this one that is about a baby taking its first breath? Because immediately I was kind of annoyed at the assumption that this podcast was making, that every baby takes its first breath, right? So it was based on that assumption. And so I thought, oh gosh, I don't know if I can listen to this. And then I just kind of had a moment of compassion, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to do it. If I need to stop because this is too much, I will. And at that point, I had a living child, so it was an interesting story, right? And I thought, oh, I don't know how a baby takes its first breath. Baby just takes breath. However, it's quite miraculous. And we know, of course, most of us moms understand that like we breathe and then that oxygen travels through the umbilical cord and into the uterus and into the baby, right? And the blood mixes around. The oxygen mixes around. What I didn't understand was that a baby, the oxygenated blood and the deoxygenated blood are all mixed together inside of the baby. And so and the reason that is because there's this flap in between the two chambers of our heart that's fluid, and it moves back and forth, and it waves around. And so when I breathe in the oxygen and it goes into the baby, that oxygenated and deoxygenated blood is mixing. When a baby is born, like the second that baby comes out of your cervix and you're in your birth canal, that flap between the two heart chambers slaps shut and becomes a wall. And never again does the oxygenated and deoxygenated blood mix. From that moment on, it's like this door shuts. And when that door shuts, the baby goes, because it's that moment where for the first time, the baby is breathing for itself.
See, I didn't know that either.
Right?
That is so cool, though.
It is fascinating. Up until that point, the baby has never breathed for itself. Its lungs have never been used as lungs are used. Its heart was different inside of the mother than it was the moment that it's born. And so I'm listening to this story, and I'm just like so overwhelmed by the beauty of it. And it was a Radio Lab production, and that's such an incredible podcast out of New York City. And so it was so well done, and I was just completely immersed and totally into it. And then it struck me, and I was like, oh my gosh, still breathing. I was always breathing for Poppy. I was always the one grieving for her, and I am still breathing for her.
I love that. I love it so much. That is so powerful.
Right? And that's what we do. All of us mothers who are still living for our children, still remembering, still talking about them, still using their names, still all of it. We are all still breathing for our children and breathing life into their story and breathing life into the love that we had for them and breathing life into the expectations and the sadness and the devastation and the trauma and the anguish and the despair and the desperation and the depression and everything that comes with losing a child. And here we are, and we're still breathing. And it's been such a fascinating experience, having really feel like I was given that title. I didn't, yes, I quote unquote came up with it, but from the idea of like how an idea, you hear creative people like, I don't know, the idea just came to me. The idea came to me. Or the people that are like, I wrote that song in 2 minutes. I woke up and wrote that song, and now it's the number one song in America, right? Like stuff like that. Like the idea came to me in that same way, and then I breathed life into it. And so I think from that perspective of someone who is deeply creative and very tapped into that intuitive side of myself, I would just encourage people who are getting ideas, who are feeling inspired, like, maybe my child is communicating with me from another realm. Maybe that hummingbird is my daughter. Maybe that little sign in the clouds really is a message from heaven that all is well. I look for signs and synchronicities and everywhere I go. And I feel like, Poppy continues to reveal herself to me. And yeah, so the book, I'm so proud of this book. It is truly a legacy that I have left the world, and it will always remain. And I'm very much looking forward to the day when my living daughter, who now is 7, gets a chance to read it, because she's going to get to know her mommy and her daddy's love story and the anguish and the sadness, and and it will put her in a position to be even more empathetic to anyone who in her life will go through loss. And to all the rainbow babies out there, like, I mean, there are so many more children are rainbows than we can truly imagine if we think about it, right? Because I did a couple public speaking things this last October. I'm also a breast cancer survivor, and October is both pregnancy and infant loss awareness
Gotta
and
be
breast
kind of
cancer
rough
month.
for you.
Oh my God. And listen, Poppy was born in October and Moxie were born in October. And I'm like, listen, I'm done. Like nothing else is allowed. Oh, and I also got my mastectomy in October. So I'm like, no, nothing else is allowed to happen in October for the rest of my
You're like, this
life.
month
Like
is full and done.
done,
Nothing.
done. I'm like, look, Halloween is a celebration because I'm like, we have moved on. Like, can we please move on from October? But anyways, I was speaking at this event for Nordstrom, which is a true honor, and talked about Moxie being my rainbow quite a bit. And then I had so many adult women come up to me afterward and be like, you know what? I never thought about it, but I'm a rainbow. I'm a rainbow. My brother's a rainbow. And I'm like, we are surrounded by rainbows. We really are. And to embrace that, and to give language to the children who come after, right? And of course, that's deeply special to you because of the project with Jasmine and that beautiful skirt, and all of us celebrating the hope of the babies who come after are ones that we lose.
I think we often think of it in terms of like when we think of rainbow babies, we think of them like after they're born or like pregnancy after loss, like things like that. But it's not often that you hear about from the rainbow babies themselves, like as they're older or as they're adults. So I think that's really interesting to hear.
Yeah, I had many experiences because I took such a long time to write the book. I spent a long time talking about the fact that I was writing a book. And thank goodness I was public about it, because I had a lot of people over the years saying, how's that book coming along? And there were many times when I was like, it's coming.
It's
Something.
coming, yeah.
I got a whole bunch of words in a document somewhere. Like, thank God it actually turned into a real thing. But I had some of the most inspiring conversations I ever had were with adult rainbows because, and I remember specifically it was at this event that I went to, this house concert where Moxie, my living child, was like 3 weeks old, and she was this tiny little 7 pound nugget, and we were so happy because we had lots of people there that knew about our loss and whatnot, and ended up talking to this older man who was a rainbow. And he said, I didn't find out I was a rainbow until I was in my 40s because women weren't talking about their losses. Decades ago, there was, I mean, even as recently as I would assume when you and I were born, women weren't talking about their losses. But, anyways, he mentioned that his whole life, his mother, there was a cloud, over her head. There was a cloud, and he never understood. He never understood what that was. And he never understood this feeling that he had. He had this eerie feeling that his mother was comparing him to something else. And he never understood until he found out that his mother had been through a full-term loss, that there was another baby and that there was a real cloud, because she never talked about it and she never processed it and she never grieved, or she grieved obviously, but she never grieved openly, and there was no recognition of that life. And so he's like, I spent my whole life feeling less than and didn't understand why. And my mother never felt the freedom or, the safety to talk about it, maybe for whatever cultural or religious or whatever trappings that prevented that woman from feeling like it was safe to talk. And so to break that taboo, like the work that you and I are doing in this world and in this space, is immensely valuable. And I don't think it can be understated how empowering it is to be able to talk about the hard things that we've been through, and to remember and to say our child's names, and to give space to those people who have never been able to talk about it, like that man who had never, he felt safe talking about something that is incredibly vulnerable. And so I just think it's so, we live in a time now, despite so many other things that feel regressive to me, but we do live in a time where we can talk about what we're going through, and there is support, for people that are really suffering. And there's so much hope, right? Because there's so much hope.
Yeah, it's just like you were saying earlier, just opening yourself up to you being vulnerable, to you sharing that stuff. I mean, you just never know who's listening and who's watching and who's gonna open up to you.
Absolutely. We don't know our impact. And I mean, I like to think that angels are both in the ether, but also that we humans are angels for one another, and that we show up in that moment, and that we hold out our hand to that stranger, or we give that person a hug, or I mean, I think about all the times I sat in the waiting room at the chemotherapy clinic, and where I was waiting to get medicine that day, and I was bald, and I mean, all the moments. And then I would see the people coming in who were clearly there for like their first visit. You could tell that like they had just gotten a diagnosis or some, like there were ways you could tell. And there were a handful of conversations that I got to have with people, and I was like, I'm almost done and I'm getting through this. And I was able to inspire other people in the same way, to be open, to not hide, to ask for help. Yeah.
And those are hard things to learn sometimes, especially
Oh
when,
yeah.
I mean, especially, when you have been hit with two tough tragedies, kind of close
Yeah,
together.
very much. Yeah. Yeah.
When were you diagnosed with the cancer?
Yeah, my diagnosis was March of 2022. It was actually, I had felt a lump in my breast earlier that February and was very nervous about it. Like I was intuitively, I knew that something was very wrong. I was also in the very, very, very final stages of the editorial process of my memoir. I had already pre-sold 200 copies. We had a release date. Like we knew all, like everything was in, I mean, it was very much on. And I had to get this my first ever mammogram, and I ended up, so I got that first mammogram on March 14th, 2 weeks after I had submitted my final manuscript to my copy editor. So like the one where like you cross the T's and make sure that like it's the word is, is not it. Like you're literally looking for the tiniest things. You can't change, you can't even rewrite a sentence at that point. You're literally like, oh, that was supposed to be a period, not a comma, or so I had already done that. So 2 weeks prior, I had like signed off and said, okay, that's it. Like this is and then I went in for that first mammogram. And the next day, my naturopath called me back because the radiologist had called her and said, someone has to talk to her immediately because Katie has cancer. Like it was just like, boom. They knew it was my left breast was riddled with it. My lymph nodes had it. And then it had metastasized into my sternum, which is the bone over our heart. And yeah, I mean, so I was diagnosed at stage 4, which is the final stage. There is no stage 5. I was very, 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 very blessed. All the circumstances being what they were. I joke that I ordered like a supersize case of cancer. I was like, just give it all, like give it to me. Yeah, and I went through chemo, radiation. I had mastectomy. I had 17 infusions of a specific type of medicine to tailor the kind that I had. I lost all my hair. I mean, it was awful. It was really the hardest thing I've ever done. Radiation was brutal. Surgery, of course, I now only have one breast. But I also have no evidence of cancer in my body, and I have not had evidence of cancer in my body for almost 2 years now, which is kind of a miraculous thing to say, given that my diagnosis was only not even 3 years ago now. So I have learned just a million and one things about, our own mortality and facing death head on, and just having to look at my own mortality and thinking, no, 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 I will not leave my daughter behind. Like I will not, that will not be her story. Like I was just so, I mean, obviously I don't think that we control whether or not we die from cancer. I don't think that I have the ability to be like, oh, I'm more special than you, so I'm not going to die of this. Like, because there are, I mean, 42,000 women die of metastatic breast cancer every year in the United States. It is the second highest cause of death from cancer for women that exists. And I mean, it's every, so many women are diagnosed and so many women are dying of this disease, which is, it's an epidemic of its own. But I do think that I'm meant to live longer. And I do think that God has many, many, many purposes for me here to continue to be an example, to be a beacon of light, to shine, to throw those retreats, to build a massive community of empowered goddesses who are so excited to be here on this planet and to tell their story, whatever it is, and to face their demons and to really just live life to the fullest, vulnerably and authentically. And and what I was going to say just about the book in particular is that my father passed, and you've read the book, but my father passes away from prostate cancer in 2019. And as I was writing the book, I really didn't know where it ended, because I didn't really just want to write some happy story of like, oh, and then Moxie was born, the end. Like, and because I write about Moxie's birth story, that was very, very, that was a beautiful, beautiful way for me to be able to become a mother again and to be a mother to a living child. But I wasn't interested in writing a story that was just like, oh, my baby died and then I had another one. Like that's not how it works. And we know that. We know as lost moms that it's not about replacing a child. It's not about like, oh, I'm over that, or like that's done now. But then when my dad got super, super, super sick with prostate cancer and it metastasized, and of course this was all before, this was, he died 3 years before I was even diagnosed with cancer. So like I had no idea that was coming in my future. But I felt when he died and I was able to realize with perspective what Poppy's death had taught me and how I was able to be with my father before he passed away, and to be able to confront the reality of death and our mortality, and the fact that if Poppy, if Poppy is in heaven, and I say heaven not from the sense of like a Christian heaven, but just like if Poppy's spirit is out there, right? Like if I choose to believe that my daughter is watching over me, then that means that when my daddy died, he would be doing the same, right? And then when I was faced with my own cancer diagnosis at stage 4 and the possibility that this could be the very thing that ends up taking my life, I it was really crushing, but also very freeing to realize, wait a second, if I believe that Poppy is still out there in some form or another, and she's with my daddy, and my daddy is out there in some form or another, then that means that when I die, I'm going to be with them and out there in some form of another. So I was able to release my fear of death, and that's a big one.
Mm.
Because most of us are scared, you know what,
Yeah.
Bliss, about, like, most of us are terrified, like, and our whole culture is anti-aging, anti beat it, anti whatever. Like, it's like, oh yeah, like, not facing the reality that death is actually absolutely coming for all of us, at one point or another, and none of us absolutely have any idea when. So I was like, oh, okay, well, I guess I am gonna die too. And you know what? It won't be so bad. Yes, my husband and my daughter and everyone that loves me will be very sad and will have to move on and process in their own way, right? But like, it isn't the end. It won't be, and this book will be my legacy. And so yeah, cancer taught me a lot. I don't need anybody else to learn that lesson for themselves. You can just get it from this podcast. Your listeners will be like, I conquered my fear of death in 45 minutes.
Hey, I wish it was that easy, right?
Right, right. And humor. I think humor and wit and being able to laugh and cry at the same time if you have to, just like, as they say these days, all the feels, have all the feelings.
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah, it definitely changes your perspective on so many things. I mean, so many things you don't
Absolutely.
even realize right away. You're just
Yes.
not the same person anymore.
No, you're not. You're not. I do. I think about those they're my lines in the sand. And for me, those are the moment that they told me that Poppy no longer had a heartbeat, and the moment I got the call that said, you have cancer. And those are my lines in the sand. And honestly, the woman that existed before Poppy died, she's gone. Like, she doesn't exist anymore. And it's true, but the woman that existed the minute before I was told I had cancer, she doesn't exist anymore either. And I think that my the subtitle of my book is My Journey with Love, Loss, and Reinvention. And I thought I was done reinventing. I mean, literally, I was like, I wrote the book. Like, I don't, like, seriously. And then I got diagnosed with cancer, and I was like, oh, I guess reinvention is just going to be one of my life's themes, because I'm going to constantly be reinventing myself. And I also think that the concept of reinvention is so inspiring to me, because we're not static, like, we're not meant to be like, oh, okay, now I'm a mom who does this, and I wear my hair this way, and I dress like this, and like, okay, I'm done. Like, it's like, no, like, we constantly have permission, if we give it to ourselves, to try on something new, to be a different way, to practice something else, to learn more, right? And so if we embrace the concept of reinvention, it's so liberating, because we can get so stuck, right? We can just get so weighed down and so burdened by the minutia of life and the very real responsibilities that we have, and the daily activities of folding the laundry, and getting the kids fed, and finding some time to take your shower, and like all those things, right? You can get so weighed down on that. But when you give yourself that permission, and you've done that, you're like, I'm going to start this group, and I'm going to this skirt's going to be sent around the world, and I'm going to talk about it, and I'm going to have a podcast. And so if we can just find ways to embrace our creativity, and not see it as like nothing is ever done, nothing is ever finished, right? It's just a constant sort of folding in on itself, and evolution. So yeah, so that's why I'm kind of like, I'm really excited now, because I am a survivor of a lot of things, and I'm calling in other survivors, and calling in that mindset of thriving, and all the other things, which is, we're always, I think, at this point in my life, I choose to believe that grief is it's like a frequency. And I feel like before Poppy died, it was like a dial on a old school radio where I had never found that frequency before. I had never really tuned in to that frequency. And then Poppy died, and it was like the little dial was just like, and everything that had been like staticky was just like, ah, like went totally like, oh, grief. Okay, I know what this is now. And then for me, it was like, oh, grief is everywhere. Like everywhere. Somebody is always grieving. Like there's never not grief. And if you tune into it, and if you tune into your own grief and you give yourself permission to be sad about whatever it is that you're grieving, whether it's an election result or someone who's passed away or a business that failed or a dream that just didn't manifest or whatever it is, right? Like it could be a house plant that was like, I tried so hard to keep it alive, but and then if you just let yourself feel it, right? And so I have not I have chosen not to tune away from grief since Poppy died. Like I've stayed present to it. And because I choose to accept that grief is a constant reality, sometimes much louder than other times. I can change the volume, but the tuning into it, it's there. I know it's real. I don't deny it. I choose to feel it. I also choose to feel other people's grief. I'm very empathetic, and so I can be with other people's grief as a life coach. What I can do that. I hold that space with my clients and really let them feel that. And also when they're really struggling with something and they can't quite feel it, I'm like, have you grieved? And they're like, and then
That
it's
would
like,
be
oh,
no. Right.
right. And then I'm like, would you like to? And they're like, and I'm like, how about for just 1 minute? Like 1 minute. And and then it's like open the door, right? Open the door to feeling those feelings, to naming it for what it is, to calling it what it is. That's grief. Oh, that's grief. Oh, that may I give myself some kindness? May I feel some compassion? I'm feeling the sadness. I'm feeling the weight, right? This is a common humanity experience. No one gets to escape this, you know? Like, and so anyway, so that's a little bit about that. I don't even know if you asked me that question. And what
But no, I
are you
love
talking
that too.
about?
And I love the reinvention, because we're constantly a work in progress. We're constantly reinventing ourselves. And it's not just like, okay, you're this person, now you're this person. You're like, you're this person at this moment in time.
Exactly.
But tomorrow you could be somebody else. We don't know what's going to
It's
happen.
it's true. It's
Mhm.
true, and I think, if we can have that sense of fluidity and flexibility, because I think you and I have small children, right? And so you see the kids at play, and you see, of course, kids get frustrated and annoyed and all that other stuff, but like when they get into that flow of like, I'm going to try something, it didn't work, I'm going to try it a different way, right? Like, and so they are not rigid. They have not like they don't have these set ideas about how things are supposed to work or how things are supposed to be. Like for instance, someone could say, why me? Like this isn't supposed to happen. This isn't the way it's supposed to turn out. Like I'm not right. Like I was this is and so children aren't so much that way because they haven't had a lot of time to become that way, right? So if we can remain flexible or just allow a little bit more fluidity and possibility. The word possibility is a big one in the coaching industry, but like really truly like what is possible outside of what your current reality is. And when we allow ourselves to be really curious, you realize, oh my gosh, there's so much possible. Like the whole it's limitless, right? If we give ourselves permission to feel that possibility.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, again, like we talked about earlier, just being open to these things, open to listening, to, just exploring, just being open to whatever it is that comes at you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm curious, I know you mentioned that you were a lawyer earlier. Did you,
Yeah.
I can't remember, were you Did you become a life coach before or after your loss? Like, did you stop
After, yeah, yeah.
after?
So I was practicing law up until, those few days. Honestly, I think I probably had a hearing, even like that week, but the last week that Poppy was in utero. And yeah, I was practicing Social Security disability law at the time. I had been doing it for about 5 years. Really, really meaningful work. All of my clients were dealing with a combination of impairments, whether physical or mental or both. And, I would advocate, my job was to advocate for their case, argue for their case in front of administrative law judges. And if we were successful, then they would get some type of monetary amount from the disability portion of the Social Security program. And it was really hard work. I traveled a ton. It was, like very, very high skill level, whatnot. And when I tried going back to work after Poppy died, wow, the shield and sort of like the protective barrier that I had created around myself, very professional barrier and necessary to be able to separate myself from their trauma and their feelings, and like especially like their feelings, their sadness. Before Poppy died, I was very, very, a very kind. I was one of the best disability lawyers you could hope to have, because I've always been an empathetic person. But after she died, it was just like their trauma was my trauma. Like their sadness was my sadness. Their loss was my loss. And I felt disabled. I was so deeply traumatized by my own sense of loss. I went back to work 4 months after she died. I took maternity leave as planned, and then a little bit more time. And then I went back on a part-time schedule. So I wasn't full-time. I was not traveling. Like I had negotiated all this with my boss at the time. And I think it was maybe 6 or 7 weeks after I went back, even at that reduced level, that I was such a wreck. And I just couldn't do it. The anxiety of like the performance, of having to perform. I was still wearing maternity pants. You know how it is. It takes you forever to recover. I was like going, and then people were saying, "Oh, how's the baby? Where's the baby?" And I'm having to tell people that my baby died. And it was so incredibly hard. I chose to resign from that job, which was, I mean, it felt like, I was like, I lost my baby. Now I'm losing my career. Like the secondary losses, the piling up of the loss. And many of the judges were so kind and really supportive. And they said, Katie, you're still doing a great job. And I'm like, look, thanks, but you have no idea what it feels like to be inside of me right now. And I was like, I'm used to doing A caliber, A plus work, and right now I'm like C minus. Like I'm barely, details and facts and circumstances, and like all I want to do is tell my clients about my dead baby, and like inappropriate. Like I had no ability to be a professional at that point. And so I had, at that point, I was so proud of myself, but I had about $30,000 of my own money in savings. And I talked to my husband about resigning and like not knowing what was next, like not having a plan. And and he was fully supportive of that. I mean, we were both wrecked, so we were really just at that point just trying to figure out how to keep going. And yeah, so I met, the first ever life coach that I met was at a conference down in Portland in 2016, within that first year. And I'd never even heard of life coaching. And coaching now is kind of like, the industry has really blown up in the last decade, but back then it was still very, very sort of new, and in its infancy of this massive explosion that it's had. I mean, there have been coaches around for ages, but like OG, that they didn't even call themselves coaches. You know what I mean? They're like, but anyways, I met this guy, Adam, and it was just like, and it was at this meetup for former attorneys who were happy in their new job. And that's when I was like, what? Like, they're like, I don't have to be a lawyer. Like, it's possible that I could do something other than be a lawyer. I'm like, but I borrowed boatloads of money to do this. How could I not do this? And yeah, and Adam was so inspiring. I ended up working with him, and then I became so inspired by the work, and I was experiencing the benefit of the work. I also did therapy at that point, because I had never had therapy before Poppy died. And then got into couples therapy and individual therapy. So I used all the things. I used all the tools to get through this tragedy, which I do encourage. I support groups. I did all of it. I did everything. And if I hadn't, I don't think I would be the person I am today. But yeah, so then I went to coaching school in 2017, 2018, a year-long program. I started my practice in 2017, coaching one-on-one, and I've been doing it off and on ever since. Like the pandemic changed. I at one point like I was like, I'm not going to take any more clients right now. I'm going to get this book written. So I finished my book. The pandemic hit, that changed things a little bit. Cancer. So I have had a number of ups and downs, but I think for the last, 7 or whatever, almost 8, 9 years now, whatever, I've always had a client, if more at times I've had more, obviously, but I'm always practicing that skill set. And now with the retreats, oh, I'm so excited. I'm so inspired. I'm not going to be coaching people, obviously, but I will be guiding and leading and facilitating and that, not whatnot. But I'm so excited to be bringing people together and in circle and in community and really getting people empowered and feeling it in the presence of other people. That, yeah, I just feel like it's the next thing.
It's so amazing though. I mean, you've done so many amazing things, and I think you're like the perfect example of they don't have to be the way they're quote supposed to be. Like you can be anything, any way life takes you.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. And and it's going to be hard and you're going to be scared and you're going to procrastinate or you're going to avoid it or you're going to crumple it up and throw it in the garbage can and you're going to you know what I mean? You're going to be totally scared, but taking risks and learning how to just put yourself out there and know that if it changes one person's life, then it's not even that that's enough, then that's what was meant to be, right? Like, and so in that way I do feel like I am an earthly angel and that I'm here still alive to continue to inspire people and to use the skills that I came in with, but also that I've been honing for years and years and years, the tools like yoga and meditation, things that I use just as a normal human being does in my own adult evolution, that then after Poppy died became my bedrock. Like I had no idea that I would have to call on these tools or the journaling or whatever, like everything that I've used. And then again, when I was diagnosed with cancer, and just to be like, oh my gosh, are you kidding me? Again, things like yoga nidra and non-sleep deep rest tools to activate my parasympathetic nervous system, and using sound therapy and I mean so many different modalities that help me to recuperate and rejuvenate and survive because living on this planet is really really hard.
It is.
It is.
It
It's
really
really
is.
hard, like I wouldn't want to be anything other than a human, maybe a dolphin, but I really like being a human, and or a unicorn, which we're not sure, the jury's still out whether or not those are real,
I think
but
everybody wants to be a unicorn, right?
but yeah, so yes, and then I think that's the thing too, is like the common suffering. Some people are like, oh gosh, don't talk about suffering all the time, and it's like, yeah, but that's the common thread, the hardness, like we're all going to have different versions of good, but like, and we're all going to have different visions of hard, but it's the hard that like really I think what binds me with others and makes me feel alive. And then of course when things are good like they are now, I just appreciate them a million times more, because although I would love to say that I'm done with suffering and that no more trauma is heading my way, like I don't know that and I can't control that, right? So just being present and grateful for the blessings that I have while I have them, and knowing that nothing is permanent, and to embrace the joy in the moment is, I mean, I've just really, I've learned that, and I am grateful for all of my difficult experiences because they have shaped me into the person I am. And I think one of my main mantras, and I would leave this with everyone who's listening, is, choose who you are becoming. Choose, like, know that it is a choice. Even when you're feeling completely disempowered and you feel like everything has been stripped away and you're just bare bones, like muck of the earth, because I've been there when you're just like empty and hollow. that's when you get to start choosing. You're a vessel, right? And so it's say, okay, I choose to become this. I'm choosing this. Like as painstaking as the next step may be toward whatever it is that's next. Like I choose this. And it's that sense of responsibility. When we take responsibility for the next step, when we, as opposed to feeling a victim of, or like that this has happened to me, right? Because yes, things happen to us. Like Poppy died, that happened to me, right? But and then I was like, okay, but I choose. I'm choosing to reinvent myself. I choose to try something new. I choose this. You can always go back to whatever was before, and I rarely ever say go back to. Whenever I find myself, and that would be another thing for especially moms experiencing loss, is I just got to get back to. There's no getting back. There's no going back. We move forward, right? We move forward into a new version of ourselves. We can, yeah, if you want to wear size 8 jeans, that's fine, but you're not, and that's a kind of a shallow example, but like that sense of like, oh, I got to get back to that body, or I got to get back to that state of mind, or I got to get back to, it's more like I got to move forward into, I'm choosing this. Today I'm choosing joy. Today I'm choosing hope, right? And then the next day, if you need a 5-hour nap and you need to choose to shut your eyes and turn it all off, do that. I have slept my way through so much. I have healed so much by sleeping and taking long naps. I took a 4-hour nap yesterday afternoon. I did. I said, I'm taking a nap, and 4 hours later, my 7-year-old comes in and went, Mommy, you have got to get up. It's dinner time. And I was like, that sounds good. I'll eat, you know, but like, right. It's just like, you've got to heal. You got, let yourself heal, take all the time you need. Healing is, there's no timeline for healing. And I think for me, one of the most surprising things, especially through the process, I also recorded the Audible version of the book. So I was the narrator. And I did that after I finished cancer treatment because I did not have the bandwidth to do it while I was going through chemo and that sort of stuff, because the fog and it's just the devastation of all that. But once I felt healed well enough, then I got to narrate the book. Like, so now I'm reading what I've written, right? And I'm really emoting because I studied theater in college. And so I'm bringing that theatrical aspect of it to the work. There were parts of me that continued to heal. And I was like, no way. Wow, like I needed to heal that part. Okay, I didn't know you were in there, but it's like the bottom of the barrel in that, spider web corner, and you're like, oh, there's still a little bit more to clean out. And so just recognizing that, right? Like the process of healing and recovery is never done. And so if we can keep that perspective of like it's an evolution, it's an unfolding, it's a reinvention, then that can, I think, be the thing that inspires you to tack on one more day, to say, okay, here I am. Today, I'm going to do the best I can. Today, I'm going to be the best version of myself. And if that version of yourself lays in bed and can't take a shower and, just watches 6 hours of Netflix, then that's the best version of you. And that's okay. It's not permanent.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's great advice all around. Like just, yeah, we all have those days. Not every day is going to be a great grief day, and not every day is going to be a bad grief day. It's just
So true. Yeah. Yeah.
so. If people wanted to connect with you or buy your book, where would they go for that?
Yeah. So the best way to connect with me, or, any ways you really want to, but I'm on Instagram at Katie Joy Duke. My website is also www.katiejoyduke.com. Still Breathing is available on Amazon and Audible. You could also order a signed copy of the book from me from my website if you'd like. And then if you are going to order the book on Amazon, I would recommend you search for Still Breathing Book. For whatever reason, there is someone who has a book called Still Beating, which is not my book. But if you search for Still Breathing, her book comes up, which is pretty annoying because it's like a fantasy, sexcapade kind of thing.
Oh, you're like, yeah, no,
And
that is completely different. No.
not my book, and also not the title of her book, which is really obnoxious. But I don't know, maybe she pays more money or something for that. So anyway, so search for Still Breathing Book on Amazon. And I do, one of the cool things was that I used a hybrid publisher. And so I will receive a fair portion. If it's like I mean, not that anybody cares about this, but if you're thinking of writing a book and you want advice on that, I would highly recommend. I own 100% of the artistic rights to my book. So it's my book, and that's a really beautiful thing, because if you have a traditional publisher, you essentially sign away the creative rights to your book, and then the publisher gets the proceeds, right? So I get the proceeds when a book is sold, and that's a really cool thing to be able to say that, to be able to say that I own my book. I don't have to ask my publisher for permission to do anything with it. It's like the Taylor Swift era, right? Like, I own it.
I love it though. Well, I
um,
want to thank you so much for coming on today and sharing your story with us.
yes, you're so welcome. Thank you for inviting me and for doing all the work you do for us lost moms, and for keeping Jasmine's spirit alive and inspiring. You were a real inspiration for me when I was writing my book, and just knowing that you were out there doing the work that you do for all of us who go through such a difficult experience in life.
Oh, thank you. That means so much to me.
Oh, you're welcome, Sarah. Yeah, I mean it.
Thank you so much for sharing your story with us. I love that we discussed how these experiences really do transform us into a completely different person. There is so much focus from society on going back to who we were before. Like, you have so much time to grieve, and then you're just supposed to pick back up where you left off. But that just isn't how grief works. We take our experiences, both the good and the bad, and we learn how to grow with them and carry them. They all shape us into who we are today. And as much as we would like to avoid anything bad happening to us, we unfortunately know that we can't. And while I would never say that our losses happen for a, quote, good reason, they do serve to help us grow and transform as a person. We'll never be the same person we were before, but that's okay. We have to learn to love and accept the new version of ourselves. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. If you like the show, please leave a review or rating on Apple or Spotify. It only takes a moment and really helps the show reach more loss and infertility families. Thank you so much for tuning in, and remember, we are all in this together.